Introductions are none. Apologies. Do we have any apologies? Mike?
Kath Johnson.
Kath, yes.
Kenneth Baird.
Kenneth, yeah. Okie dokie. Order of business is as submitted. Declarations of interest can, of course, be raised at any time in the meeting, should you be aware of them. Minutes of the previous meeting. Has anyone got any?
Provost, sorry, I had my hand up just on the order of business.
Yes.
I just wanted to query why the A701 school paper was being held in private. There didn't seem to be a relevant explanation, and it's just really difficult asking councillors to make a decision without being able to consult the community, particularly the community council. So if we could get an explanation for that, please.
Thank you, Ellie. I understand your point. There's, of course, land negotiation going on, but perhaps I should pass to Kevin Anderson to respond to that.
Thank you, Provost. It is precisely as you indicate. There is a land negotiation going on at the present time. There will be valuations on a commercial and market basis involved in that prospective transaction, and it is just an indicative position at this time. And the intention is to give governance to staff to continue that action. And of course, again, as is detailed in the report, we will bring that back to council and expect to be in an open forum consequently.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. And as you know, the in advance, if at any point I miss anyone, it will be inadvertent. Okay, the minutes, the minute volume is in publication. Any comments, any thoughts? In which case the minutes are adopted. We don't require a proposer and seconder, I don't think, for that. Mr. Turpey can advise. It's Mr. Turpey here.
Yes, Provost, sorry, I'm on mute. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, fine. Questions to Council Leader are none. We have a motion, and I have to report on this motion as Provost. I don't believe we can hear this motion. Under Standing Order 8.9, motions must be referred to the chair of the meeting before being presented for consideration. This motion has been presented on the agenda without being referred to myself as chair. Therefore, Standing Order 8.9 has not been complied with. The scheme of administration specifies what each committee can do, and this is referenced in standing orders. The Council accepted that the topic of the motion presented on the agenda falls under the General Purposes Committee, and therefore the motion should be one for that committee to consider. Standing Order 8.3 provides for motions to the Council and its committees. The seconder of the motion did not in fact sign in any form, either wet or digitally, as required by Standing Order 8.3. This was not done, and further this means a more favourable facility has ostensibly been provided to one elected member, which has not in the past, or indeed in the last week, been offered to other elected members. There is no provision for alternative verification methods, and proposals for that should come to the Standing Orders Working Party. That was not done. A false redaction stamp was applied to the motion. The proposer and seconder have not withdrawn the motion, even though it has been pointed out to them that the redaction, where there is no signature, is misleading to councillors and the public and potentially not legal. Under standing orders, the chair, being myself for meetings of the council, is the final arbiter as to whether a motion shall be presented for consideration. For these reasons, the motion shall not be presented for consideration at this time. However, if properly executed, it can return to be considered at another meeting. In the interim, so that the proposer and seconder are not materially disadvantaged, I and the council officers who work together on street naming will not name any further streets in calendar 2020 unless a developer has an urgent need. We have an obligation as a council to name streets. Were it to be the case that an urgent need arose, then the relevant local councillors will be reminded on application of the development to which they already know that planning permission has been formally granted. May I remind councillors, community councillors, historic and civic societies and members of the public that potential street names may be submitted to Midlothian Council at any time and will be considered wherever a street has yet to be named, and in accordance with the rules agreed unanimously by the Council in 2016. We now move on to the next item.
Yeah, I think Councillor Milligan wishes to speak.
Yes, I just spotted that. Thank you. Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, Provost, if this was a real serious motion and in normal times, I would tend to agree with you on your ruling. But however, given the fact that we're sitting in the middle of a pandemic, the last thing I want to see is anybody talking to Midlothian who's to sign a motion. I'm going to move that we suspend all relevant standing orders and allow for this motion to be heard this morning.
Councillor Milligan, if you listen closely to what I said, it was not a question of having a wet signature brought to Mid-House. A digital signature has, even before lockdown, been acceptable. There was no signature at all. And with the redaction stamp, this is a false document. You're well aware of the number of contractual disasters we've had when our procedures have not been followed. So on the principle that we should not have poor administration in the Council, I'm opposed to this attempt to undermine our existing standing orders. The word provost word is final on this, unless you can find a seconder. I would caution councillors against supporting a motion which validates a false redaction stamp in a document brought before the Council.
I stand by my proposal to suspend all relevant standing orders and to hear this motion.
Is there a seconder for that?
I'm happy to second that, Provost.
Okay, could I ask for anyone to speak to this motion further?
Councillor Cassidy has his hand raised as well, Provost.
Councillor Cassidy.
I was just going to second it, but I thought Councillor Parry would do that.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Can I ask Democratic Services to hold the requisite vote and remind us of the requisite majority for this motion?
Provost, I stand to be corrected by Varun, but I think there are 16 members in the meeting this morning, at which point the requisite number would be 11 in terms of Standing Order 3.1.
Yes, and you presumably have all worked out that this motion can be brought validly to the next Council meeting, and there will be no streets named unless absolutely necessary in the interim. Kelly, I presume your smile there indicates that you did hear that.
I think everybody heard that, Provost, but I think we're now ready to move on with that vote. So I'm sure we'll get to CRTs when we move the motion.
Thank you for assisting with the vote. I'm sure you've done your work on this. Could I ask Democratic Services to record the vote?
There's 16 elected members present. Councillor Alexander first, for the motion or against it?
I'm betwixt and between, because I think wholesale wiping out of the standing orders is maybe the wrong way to go, but at the same time I would like to hear the motion heard. So I would like advice on that, please.
Chair, I think we have street naming and numbering is an element for the GP committee, as you pointed out. However, Standing Order 713 allows the council to deal with any matters that could competently go before any of its committees or subcommittees. So that's not the issue. I suppose the standing orders that we require will be 8.3, 8.9 and 11.2, which will be suspended purely for this one item of debate if the numbers are there, Councillor Alexander. It is not possible to, you may be stuck betwixt and between, but in terms of standing orders, it's a very binary decision. If 11 members vote in favour of the suspension, then we can hear the motion. If 10 or fewer vote in favour of the motion, then we will not hear, in favour of the suspension, then we will not hear the motion.
Okay, if it's for this one time only, then I am happy to go with suspending the standing orders for this one time.
Councillor Cassidy?
For the motion.
Councillor Curran,
For the motion.
Councillor Hackett,
For the motion.
Councillor Hardy,
Against the motion.
Councillor Imrie,
For the motion.
Councillor Lade Douglas,
Can I abstain from this, Rona?
yep,
Thank you.
Councillor McCall,
For the motion.
Councillor Milligan,
For the motion.
Councillor Muirhead,
For the motion.
Councillor Monroe,
Against the motion.
Councillor Parry,
For the motion.
Councillor Russell,
For the motion.
Councillor Smale,
Against the motion.
Councillor Wallace,
Can I just be clear on what we are voting for here? Are we voting to suspend standing orders, or are we voting for the motion? Because people seem to be saying they're voting for the motion. And I think that the proposal was that we suspend standing orders so we could hear the motion. Can we be quite clear on that?
It is quite clear, I believe, that this is about the suspension of a limited number of standing orders as described by the monitoring officer.
Okay, then suspend standing orders, please.
Councillor Winchester,
For the motion.
that's 12 in favour of the motion.
Then we proceed to hear the motion.
Thank you, Provost. The motion today refers to the implementation of a street naming policy in Midlothian and allows for community engagement into that process, as well as laying out a proposed process for notification. This motion has come about through joint working between all 3 ward councillors in Midlothian West, as well as working with our community councils. And I'd like to thank both councillors for that, to Councillor Winchester for seconding the motion and Councillor Imrie for his support as well. I have to say, Provost, it's been really disappointing to have you object to even having this motion being heard.
No, I have not objected to having the motion being heard. I've proposed that it is heard when it is properly constituted. Could you please correct yourself?
Okay. In that case, it was disappointing that you had put in some effort before the meeting today to try and dissuade the proposers from bringing forward this motion.
How was it? There was no seconder. It was proposed. It wasn't seconded. How was it seconded when there was no seconder?
Sorry, Provost, this meeting isn't running it to order.
I would be grateful, Councillor Monroe, if you would allow the proposer to speak.
Okay, thank you. I'll continue. And this is a particular issue given the issues that we had in Lone Head last year, and I know it was a disappointment of community leaders there that they wouldn't have their ideas listened to by yourself, and they felt like there was a refusal to take any input from you on board. So I'm very glad that this motion has been pursued today. It will empower our communities and our community councils, as well as provide a method that councillors can feed into, and I would encourage all councillors to support it today. Thank you.
The seconder.
I'm very pleased that this motion is being heard today. It's a totally non-political motion supported by all 3 ward councillors in Midlothian West, 1 Labour, 1 Conservative and 1 SNP. Midlothian West seems to have some of the most housing going up. We've got Lonehead, Roslin, Bilston, Rosewell, Auchendinney and even parts of Pennycook that we support have had new developments and some still going up. Both Lonehead Community Council and Roslin and Bilston Community Council commented on the process and feel that they know their areas best and they would like some input. Others do not know that they even have a say, and all just don't realise how early the streets are named. With this motion, all 3 Midlothian West councillors hope the communities will feel connected to the newer areas and welcome the newer residents with open arms. I ask you all to support Midlothian West councillors and show that our communities matter and can have a say in their areas by voting for the motion.
Thank you very much. Would anyone like to speak against this motion? Perhaps I could comment as chair. I have faithfully, as Provost of Midlothian, fulfilled the requirements of the street naming policy agreed unanimously by the Council in 2016. Extensive research has gone into the scholarship and geographical and geological and cultural background of all the areas that are involved, and the names have been consistently applied. The problem we have had is that councillors appeared not to have informed community councils and other interested groups that they have a right to suggest names. We've had very few names from councillors themselves. Those names that have been suggested fall foul of two main rules that are in the existing constitution of the street naming policy. One is the requirement that we do not duplicate streets. If we do, then that leads to the risk that emergency services, delivery services, indeed the general public, cannot find the precise address that is required. The second proviso, which is relevant, is that we're not allowed to name streets after the name of anybody living or recently deceased. So we wait for a generation. Now it's possible to name people who were involved in the Second World War, but I have, in the last week, had two applications that fall foul of this test. I'm very happy to listen to all suggestions and would remind you that the existing policy allows the whole public to contribute valid street names to the process. I'm unclear as to whether this process will continue to allow the public to have a large role as distinct from community councils. It also does not seem to provide for the historical associations throughout Midlothian who often have a very good idea of what is possible. So that's the argument against this motion. Also, it takes the provost from a position of doing a great deal of work, but then being bowled out at the first strike and with no further role in the process, not even as the arbiter if there happened to be a tied vote at the end when the community councils and the councillors cannot agree. So I do think this motion needs an awful lot of work in order to reconcile it to what is already best practice, not only for Midlothian Council, but across councils in the United Kingdom. I don't want to see a return to the days where a councillor and an officer goes down to the pub and out comes the name Cost Kia Way, a name so ridiculous that even the Guardian newspaper chose fit to call us out on that one. So there's a quality control issue here that will not go away and needs to be integrated with whatever policy emerges. I'm very happy to have further discussions. I have not been approached by either of the proposers of these motions. I do believe they should have spoken to me and the officers in order to have a more workable motion on this topic.
Robert, I think Councillor Imrie would like to speak.
Councillor Imrie.
Yeah, thanks very much, Provost, for allowing me to come in on this. As already been alluded to, I'm the third member of the tripartite Midlothian Council West representative, and I'm quite happy to support the motion. In fact, I would have been more than happy to either move or indeed second it. But I mean, I gave way to Kelly and Pauline. I did write in, strangely enough, just a few weeks ago regarding some suggestion that Ross and Bilston Community Council were looking to get for some of the street names with regard to the developments that Kelly and Pauline have already alluded to. And Verona gave me a kind rebuke on that, saying that we were on a timeline to get these things done because it was these horrible developers that were taking their time. So what I would like to see, Provost, and I don't think it undermines anything that you're doing at the moment, and you will still at the end of the day be the final arbiter on the street naming, but it will go through an extension process of what goes on at the moment, and I think that's all we're looking for. But what I would really like to see for the minute, not so much by way of an amendment to it, is that as soon as planning permission is granted for these developments, then the onus is on the developer to come forward, not to leave it to the last minute, which puts any provost in a terrible position. And I don't want to undermine that in any way, shape or form. But I do think a common sense approach by all parties can actually get us to a common end and a common aim. Thanks very much, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Imrie. Of course, the provision for the provost to come back in at the end as arbiter is not actually in the motion, and I think that underlines that this will need a lot of detailed work if we're to improve on the existing arrangements.
President, Councillor Wallace would like to speak.
Councillor Wallace. I think you may be muted, Councillor Wallace.
Okay, I'm no now then. I think I object slightly to one of your remarks there that the provost and an officer would go down to the pub.
I'm not thinking of you. This was a long time ago.
Well, okay. Just you didn't clarify that position. I can assure you, I did not go with Mr. Ward to the pub to discuss these things. He would look up local history and come and let me know when people were needing streets named, and I was happy to go ahead, and if I had any suggestions or local members had any suggestions, as had Councillor Jim Muirhead, when he approached and asked if we could get a street in Bonnyrigg named after the old chap that caught Black. And what we did then was we approached the wee lassie's family to ask if they had any objections, just in case it brought back bad memories to them, but they were quite happy to go ahead. And I'm not sure if that, and what I was told was that the person had to be dead for a period of 10 years, and I'm not sure if that was the case then, but I was quite happy to put forward that man's name, even if he hadn't been, even if he was still living, I would have done it. So my objection was that you were suggesting that provosts and the council officer would go to the pub. So
there is one example that I have in mind. Councillor Wallace, I'm conscious that you were involved in street naming. I've had to defend 2 of your decisions, and you named those streets with perfect integrity and absolutely within the rules. So my comments are simply limited to cost key away. It's interesting, if we come to look at street naming, that the use of commercial names in streets is not allowed by many councils, and we might want to consider a formal rule of that nature. I think we may have exhausted this topic. Would we like to have we've had a vote on the motion, that the motion be heard. We now have a vote on the substantive motion itself. Democratic Services, would you like to take over?
It'll just be a roll call vote again.
Yep, sure.
Councillor Alexander.
I'm happy to go with the motion.
Councillor Cassidy.
For the motion.
Councillor Curran.
For the motion.
Councillor Hackett.
For the motion.
Councillor Hardy.
Against the motion.
Councillor Imrie.
Sorry, for the motion.
Councillor Lee Douglas.
I'm going to abstain from this, thank you.
Councillor McCall.
For the motion.
Councillor Milligan.
For the motion.
Councillor Muirhead.
For the motion.
Councillor Monroe.
Against.
Councillor Parry.
For the motion.
Councillor Russell.
For the motion.
Councillor Smale.
Against the motion.
Councillor Wallace.
For the motion.
Councillor Winchester.
For the motion.
It's 12-3. The motion is passed.
The motion is carried. Thank you all for your contributions on this interesting topic. And I would again remind you that the council, as far as I know, still welcomes name suggestions from any part of the community as part of the process. I look forward to any subsequent proposals from the promoters for aligning this policy as per the motion with the existing policy. We move now to 8.1, family leave guidance for councillors. I believe Kevin is going to speak to this.
Provost, my colleague Gary Fairley is actually going to speak to this report.
Gary's with us today. Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, Provost, today Council is asked to determine whether it wishes to voluntarily adopt and implement the family leave guidance for councillors, which is endorsed by COSLA, by the COSLA Council leaders. Thank you.
That was short and sweet. Do we have contributions from the floor? Hands, please.
Councillor Parry, then Councillor Muirhead.
Councillor Parry, then Councillor Muirhead. You got there first. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, I think this is a really welcome paper today, and members will be aware that this is something that we've discussed at the Standing Orders Working Group and had good cross-party support there. It's been fantastic that Midlothian Council were one of the first councils to pass a motion in principle to approve something like this, and we were aware that that work was going on. So I was very proud to move that motion a few years ago, pregnant in the chamber, and so it's really good to see it come full circle and see it come back here today. So I hope this paper's passed. Thank you.
Okay, so there's kind of motherhood and apple pie aspect to this, but I see that Andrew Hardy and Jim Muirhead want to speak. Jim Muirhead first.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, I'm in support of this as well. The one question I would ask, and it's more for clarification, I suppose, to the public in a certain way, is it, can I just confirm for the officers that this proposal does not advantage councillors or provide councillors with any more than we would afford our staff?
Provost, I'm happy to answer that, and Jim's right. It does not be any better than staff, and it reflects best practice in terms of employment law.
Councillor Hardy.
Thank you, Provost. I mean, I think we're all aware in Midlothian that we had kind of had an informal agreement that we were effectively in this position. So I think it's quite right that we all support this motion. Not just to send a message out to any potential future councillors in Midlothian, but actually to send a message to councils across Scotland, because having spoken with members of other councils, I've been made aware that the same informal relationship that we were happy to agree in Midlothian had not been agreed in other councils. So I think we do need to send a clear message that, you know, councillors should be entitled to a right of a family life, the same as everyone else. And as far as I can see, the proposals for both maternity and paternity leave in this motion are consistent with the legal protections that people have in normal jobs. So yeah, I'm fully behind this motion. I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you very much for that. I don't see other hands up. Is anyone of a contrary view? Which, if that being so, we do not need a vote. This has been agreed by the council. Mr. Turpie will no doubt tell me if I'm wrong in that. On to 8.2, menopause guidance for councillors. Gary Fairley.
Yes, Provost, again, council was asked to consider the menopause guidance for councillors. This time it was approved by the COSLA Community Wellbeing Board in June 2020. So council is asked to determine whether it wishes to voluntarily adopt and implement the guidance for councillors.
Chair, Councillor McCall.
Councillor McCall, thank you. Yeah, yes, yeah, all the hands were at the wrong end of my list. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Provost. As a menopausal woman, I'm extremely delighted to see this come into council today. I really like one of the particular sentences in it. We recognise that everybody's different, and I think that's really important, that how my menopause is will not be how anybody else's menopause will be. And I think that's really important. Forgive me, I've got a sore throat today, so I'm not going to speak an awful lot. Just want to put on record how pleased I am that this is coming to council.
Thank you for that, obviously strongly felt response. Stephen Curran.
Thanks, Provost. As Midlothian Council's representative on the COSLA Wellbeing Board, I'm delighted to see that this paper and this topic on the agenda, if for no other reason but to raise awareness of the impact that the menopause can have on women and their wider families. And I think section 3 of the paper really highlights these facts. I know Councillor Parry, as chair, has also been involved with this as well, and I'd just like to acknowledge that. So, as I say, great to see this on the agenda, and I welcome the guidance.
Thank you very much. And Janet Leigh Douglas.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, around the age of 12, my mum experienced fear when going out to shopping centres and public spaces, and I spent a lot of time worrying about her and trying to give reassurance as her sort of, you know, her personality changed. Later in life, I realised that for, you know, at least 5 years, she'd been experiencing panic attacks, loss of confidence, sleepless nights, whilst caring for all of us as a large family, and very sadly had no one to talk to about it, as she didn't really understand the symptoms of menopause. Yeah, also, you know, I'm experiencing symptoms of sleepless nights, and when the HRT patches run out, everyone runs for cover in my house. It's been a bit of a joke. But with my, you know, but because of my mum, I openly talk about how I feel to my teenage boys, but hopefully they'll grow up to appreciate and consider the effects that the menopause has physically and psychologically on women. So it's important to talk and offer support. So I totally agree with the recommendations for the implementation of menopause guidance, and not just the councillors, but all women in the workplace.
Thank you very much. Janet, if your hand goes down, I think that is the contribution. I found, despite the brief of Diane, I think your hand's up. Do you want to speak?
Yes, as someone who has gone through this whole process and at the same time had to deal with bereavement of both my parents, I can just say that this can be, for many women, a really horrific time, and it does usually happen at the time when parents sadly die. So I'm very happy to support this, and also just to make people aware of the double effect that it might have on people at this time.
I think that's a very well made point, and we've had a very short discussion of this, but I think the contributions have been very moving. I wonder if anyone has a contrary view. I very much doubt we will. Can I take it that this motion should be therefore decided on and recommended? There being none con. Thank you all very much. We move on to 8.3, the meeting schedule for the remainder of 2022. This is the small aspect of the work of the Standing Orders Working Group that has actually concluded that we can at least have dates the rest of 2020. 2021 remains under discussion. I regret to inform the Council that the previous 2 meetings of the short live party here have had to be cancelled, but we will be having one shortly. Would the Executive Director please like to talk to this?
Thank you, Provost. This report is for members to consider the cycle of meetings detailed in the appendix for the remainder of this calendar year, and that these are held on a virtual basis in accordance with the Council's previous decision of digital by default. The report was submitted to August Council and then remitted, as you indicate, to the Standing Orders Working Group before it's now resubmitted with no changes. So Council is recommended to confirm the current schedule. Thank you.
I think in the words of some politicians way back, Tina applies, there is no alternative. Is that correct, Kevin? We're too late in the day to fiddle around with this.
That's really a position we're in for the remainder of the existing cycle. As you say, there are other considerations that we're looking at for 21-22 to come forward, we anticipate, to November Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Have we any dissent from these dates? There being none, I take that as carried. We move on to 8.4, the Safety Advisory Group Policy. Kevin.
Thank you, Provost. My colleague Derek Oliver will speak to this paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, members. For a number of years, Midlothian Council has had processes in place to safeguard public safety at larger events. Arrangements have also been in existence for smaller events that are brought to the Council's attention by event organisers. However, generally, there has been no standard approach to event safety planning within Scottish local authorities, with many managing the coordination of events in their area on an ad hoc basis. Tragic incidents at a couple of Scottish car rally events led to COSLA forming a Safety at Public Events working group with representation from key professional networks and agencies. The group was to consider the development of a standard national approach to event safety, and one of the main recommendations to arise from this work was for each local authority to formally establish a system for planning events which should be referred to as the Safety Advisory Group. The policy before members formally establishes the Safety Advisory Group process for Midlothian. It's a multi-agency approach ensuring event organisers safely plan, prepare and exercise their event. The policy has been drafted with input from council services and our multi-agency partners, as well as feedback from community group. The council recognises that public events positively promote Midlothian, tourism, community development, social cohesion, civic and cultural identity, and can enhance community life as well as benefit the local economy. In essence, this policy delivers a one-stop shop approach for organisers, establishing a single point of contact for planning an event and access to a range of services as well as access to our partners. Advice, guidance and training will be offered to a range of community groups as we develop the processes further, and particularly helpful as we negotiate through these challenging times and in the years ahead. It is recommended that Council approves the Midlothian Safety Advisory Group policy.
Thank you very much for all the work, considerable work that's gone into this. Working across entities in Scottish public life is a very challenging task. Do we have comments? Do we have questions? John Hackett.
Thanks, Provost, and thank you to Mr. Oliver. It's really pleasing to see this paper come forward. As Cabinet Member with responsibility for commercial operations, I have a lot of contact with Gala Day committees and Christmas festivity committees as well. And it's often the case, I think, for newer organisations, they found it quite difficult to navigate their way through some of the processes that the council require of them. So to have this, one-stop shop approach, I think will greatly benefit our community, particularly as we're, it's been formally recognised today that we're the fastest growing community in Scotland again. And because of that, we'll be seeing new events, hopefully, coming forward. I think as well, having if I'm right, one officer at least that will be able to talk people through various processes, because as was laid out, there's a number of agencies involved in different council departments, so it eliminates the silo working as well in the council, which is pleasing to see. So I'd welcome the recommendations. Thank you, Provost.
Yeah, thank you. It was pleasing to see that there's a gradation of degree of discipline according to the scale of the event, so that it's flexible according to the organisations that we interface with. Are there further comments? Do I take it that we have accepted the recommendation of this paper? Curran, let me get you on the radar. Councillor Curran.
Thanks, Provost. Just briefly, and thanks, Derek. I welcome this report as well. Just really, John touched on the gala days. I note there's a 12-week minimum period for applications. If we can just engage early with our gala day committees, they work hard as it is, just to ensure that nobody misses that deadline, particularly in the first year as the new policy is implemented.
Yeah. Point noted, definitely, and given where we are at this point with changing Scottish Government guidelines, etc., regarding event safety, which will be going undoubtedly into the future as well, as we deal with not just purely health and safety in the generic form, but also in dealing with COVID transmission, we will be flexible towards our smaller community groups to ensure that we help them plan their event as safely as possible.
Thank you. There being no further.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to congratulate Mr. Oliver on this report as well, because I do think that there has been a lot of ad hoc practices in these kind of areas that are dark little corners of the council, and I think that I welcome this report and I welcome the work that's gone in it. So thank you, Derek.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Checking for any further interest. Colin, your hand's still up, but that's it. Do we take it that that is therefore adopted? It is indeed. We move to item 8.5, the Midlothian Compact Agreement, and I think Joan Tronent's going to speak to this. Joan?
Provost, it's Fiona Robertson, Executive Director here. Unfortunately, have to offer apologies for Joan Tronent this morning. So, the Midlothian Compact Agreement 2020 to 25, the purpose of this report is to present to Council the updated Midlothian Compact Agreement. And the agreement creates and establishes the foundation for positive working relationships between the third sector and Midlothian Council to support better outcomes for communities. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the co-authors of this report and the co-leaders of the working group that have been instrumental in developing this agreement. Annette Lang, the Strategic Service Design Manager, who's with us this morning, and Rebecca McKinney from the third sector. So the agreement sets out the values that will underpin the joint partnership working arrangements and also the actions and outcomes that we will collectively seek to achieve through strengthened cross-sector collaboration. Further detail on these values and actions can be found in section 3 of the report, and the full version of the Midlothian Compact Agreement can be found by following the link included in Appendix A. We will ensure that the track values of togetherness, respect, accountability, creativity and kindness will become embedded in how we work together. And we will strive to demonstrate these values across all areas of our partnership working. A communication strategy and engagement sessions will be developed and taken forward to support elected members, staff, volunteers and third sector directors to embrace these values and strengthen our partnership working relationships. Midlothian is recognised for the strength of its cross partnerships and relationships, some of which will be highlighted later today within the Care for People report. The Midlothian Compact Agreement is considered to be even more important than ever to continue to maintain and support our communities through the many challenges faced as a result of the pandemic. Council is therefore asked to note and support the priorities outlined in the Compact Agreement, and that as a Council we will adhere to the track values. Thank you.
Thank you, and again I congratulate you on this document and also generally towards the third sector as such a vital part of Midlothian's community activity. Further comments? Russ Limry.
Thank you very much, Provost. I too am very supportive of the Midlothian Compact Agreement. I mean, when you think back, we started off this journey in 2008 and have worked very hard to support and work with the community groups and indeed the third sector organisations. I know, Provost, like everything else in life, if you've got the money there, you don't get the problems. It's when the money isn't available, then you get the dare I say, the fallout sometimes. But you know what? You've sometimes got to work through that. And I think it's very, very important that we have this recognised by others outside Midlothian for the good work that we've done here. We practically underestimate the amount of work that goes on between ourselves and these various organisations and the success stories that brings to Midlothian as a community. And you know, it's something we should cherish. So I'm really, really very happy to endorse the renewal of this Midlothian Compact Agreement, which should take us onwards to 2025 and hopefully with a better understanding between all the parties and about how we can work together and resolve issues that perhaps sometimes would have separated us. Thanks very much indeed, Provost.
Thank you. I'm grateful for your comments on this important document. It's for noting, it's for information. Are there any other contributions? Appears not, and therefore thank you again for that document, Fiona. Item 8.6, homelessness update. Kevin Anderson.
Thank you, Provost. This report follows concerns of the significant cost increase that had been reported to members at August Council for repurposing the former Lonehead police station, which was purchased originally to convert into an improved and supportive temporary accommodation offer for homeless households, withdrawing from the use of bed and breakfast provision in Midlothian. Potential options are included with the original proposal for conversion, and also the factors resulting in the escalating costs are detailed in the report. There's the prospect of additional units on the site. They've been reviewed, but the restricted space has determined that this is not feasible. A new build project is similarly restricted in either a 2-storey or a 3-storey development, with improved space standards resulting then in a 6 or 7 flat development respectively. A new build will attract grant subsidy, and a conversion, however, will not. Each of these options are costed in section 3 with present indicative values, but a feasibility study is recommended as necessary to assess any programme and also the planning aspects. A final option for consideration is to market the site. In section 4, the report also updates members in the Pentland House provision from the successful reprovisioning in 2015, and that remains viable for the expected 10-year lifespan, and future reprovisioning will then be included within the Council's Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan, due to be reported to members in June 2021. Thank you.
Peter, you're muted.
It's usually my job to point that out to others. Thank you very much. Kevin, if I understand this paper correctly, we've got 3 options which are set out at little page 4 within the document. The 7-bed refurbishment, the 6-bed new build, and the 7-bed new build. And there's a paragraph underneath that says, well, if we decided a new build, we could sell the existing property, but that would only get us about £200,000. So in terms of cost and value, the 7-bed refurbishment, even if we got 200,000 for the existing building, would not be cheaper than going ahead with that option 1, the 7-bed refurbishment, that works out at 125,918 per unit. Is that a correct analysis?
Well, just to clarify, Provost, in terms of any new build development, that would be retained by the council for its use as opposed to selling on, which I think is what you may have been suggesting.
Okay, but the 7-bed refurbishment, we would continue to own the property as well?
Yes, that's correct. Well, the property would have to be demolished for the new build.
Sure.
And that's why there's demolition costs included within the cost profile provided.
So, in fact, there is always an advantage of about 200,000 by just doing the refurbishment. Is that correct?
Yes, in terms of the value against the cost benefit for the bed and breakfast provision, because that's the whole purpose of repurposing, is that we withdraw from B&B temporary accommodation. And that is equated to this year to be about £502,000, and that has reduced significantly from 842 in the year 2018-19, as we have progressively moved away from bed and breakfast provision into the likes of Pentland, Polton, and potentially Jarnock also coming forward. So they're in a better environment for the period of prior to permanent rehousing.
Well, temporarily we are. I think we all know what's lying ahead. And I saw Russell Imrie's hand first, then Colin Cassidy. Russell. Russell, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Provost. I try my best, I really do. Anyway, thank you, Provost. And can I just thank the Council for allowing us to get this continued from the last meeting to get the full facts in front of us, which I found really, really helpful. And thanks to the officers providing that. So I'm just going to cut to the chase, Provost. I'm going to actually suggest that we reject recommendation A, that we approve the option to dispose of the site, subject to us not losing the site of the, not the site per se, but site of SIGHT of the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan, and instruct the officers to utilise the monies to be spent on purchasing properties from the private sector. We can get a pretty good deal at this moment in time with the private sector, as we've shown as a council already since we came out of lockdown. And I actually believe that that's a real opportunity to do it in that way. The second point, Provost, to take up the opportunity to look at the Galladay Committee's suggestion that they get action or option, should I say, on the garage part of that particular site. Now, Provost, I'm not of a mind that we could only go 2 stories. We went 3 stories, dare I say, just about 50 yards across the road. And, you know, as a planning committee in these days, it might have been rejected. It might have been up for refusal by the officers. But anyway, the planning committee saw fit to develop that site, and it has been it was developed out there right on the corner of the traffic lights some many years ago. So I'm very much looking at all the numbers, and I cannot see for the life of me the kind of monies that we're going to pour into this site being best value. And I really do think the opportunity to dispose of that and see what we can get back from there, as I say, get the officers to have a look at the suggestion by the Gallaudet Committee without commitment to that, and more importantly, instruct the officers to go out there and purchase the half a dozen units or whatever for the rapid rehousing programme. I think that at the end of the day is a way forward, and I'm prepared to actually move that as a motion here today, Provost. Thanks.
Thank you, Russell. Now, a little bit of patience from everyone. If you look at the development options set out in the paper at little page 4, there's the first one is a 7-bed refurbishment. Can we label that option A, which I think is what you said yourself? We have the 6-bed new build option B, and we have the 7-bed new build option C. This is for the purposes of sorting the motions. Now, does your proposition fit into option B, or are you talking about some totally different approach?
Sorry, Provost, apologies. I'm looking at the front end of the paper, which has 3 recommendations under item 2 on it. Now, if I'm wrong, I put my hands up to this, but recommendation A is to approve the commission of a feasibility study for an affordable new house build. Second one is to approve the option for disposal, and the third one is to note the Pentland House part. Now, that goes without saying. That's a noted bit. What I'm homing in on is item B, and suggesting that the council make a decision to dispose of the site, and also, but to utilise the monies that would have been spent to buy off-the-shelf units for the rapid rehousing transition plan, so we don't lose sight of that, because I don't want us to go, oh, well, that's thrown away now, we'll do something else. I'm very committed, as I'm sure are other colleagues, to the rapid rehousing transition plan. So I just wanted to make that clear, but we have, each of us, and at this moment in time, the whole footprint, including the garage, was part of that site. And all I'm asking the Executive Director to do, if the motion is passed, is look see at the Gallaudet Committee suggestion of the utilisation of the garage part, without commitment, but just asking them to look at that. And I think that that's the cleanest way of doing it, Provost. I've agonised over the numbers, and like you know, you come up with a different figure every time.
Right. I want to pin you down, Russell, so we all get this right. The one thing you definitely want is that we do not do the 7-bed refurbishment. It's costing too much. That's what you're saying, isn't it? You then want to look at a new build possibility, but I'm getting the message that maybe not on that site.
Sorry, Provost, that's absolutely correct. I'm saying the money that we would have used, we go out there into the private sector and purchase these houses under our rapid rehousing transition plan. And thirdly, we just look at the Gallaudet Committee's email regarding the garage.
So in that case, all the options on page 4 fall away because we've flogged the site.
That's right.
Good.
Thank you, Provost, for clarity on that.
Right. There may be other views. Could I?
Oh, indeed. I'm just saying.
So you're proposing a motion. We'll come to getting a
first position so that we can.
The critical analysis is, first off, is Councillor Imlay with let's flog off the site. So anything on that site becomes impossible except the garage transaction, which no doubt will be at arm's length, following the public pound and all that good stuff. Councillor Cassidy caught my eye first, then Councillor Hardy, then Councillor Curran.
Thank you, Provost. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd just like to say that Russell has just about covered every point that I was thinking of with that particular paper. I think we don't have a great history in Midlothian Council of making silk purses out of pigs' ears, and I think that's what we've got with that old police station. I think that we, knowing Russell's local knowledge, his experience in planning and what have you, I'd go 100%, and I would second his motion for that.
Okay, so the motion is approving the option for disposal, but I would quite like to ask Democratic Services, now we have an up and running motion, whether we need any additional words about going out into the private sector to find some opportunity on a different site.
I've got a note of what Councillor Emery has proposed.
Yeah, okay. So that all the councillors understand, we will definitely sell off the site. We might sell off a bit for the gala. We will definitely look out for some other site where we can very quickly, I would have thought, be able to fulfil this requirement. So that's a motion that's got a proposer and a seconder. I'm conscious that Councillor Hardy and then Councillor Curran also want to speak while this motion is on the stocks. Councillor Hardy.
Thank you, Provost. I mean, I'm kind of behind where Councillor Emery was. I just wanted to I would have been quite happy to second his motion, but I would have been keen to see if about adding some extra wording, which would have been just to ensure that the council seeks all sources of funding for this this proposed purchase from a private sector, including any potential developer contributions, or indeed potentially even including it as a planning condition on a new development that such a site is built, just to take some financial pressures off the council, if that would be possible.
So that's really aside from the motion that you want to look into any section 75 ways of funding this. Councillor Emery looks a bit puzzled as to whether that's viable, but maybe not. But before we come back to him, Councillor Curran.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, I would agree with Councillor Russell and Casty. On the face of it, the 7-bed refurb at 125,000 per unit looks value for money, but because it's a refurb and it's the same footprint but just smaller, the cost per square metre is much greater. And I would agree, we can buy quicker and cheaper from the private market. And actually, I'm sure that governance already exists with officers to purchase and to meet the needs of a rapid rehousing transition plan. So I would just agree with the comments that's been made.
So as it stands, the financing of this would come out of the housing revenue, housing capital accounts. The question of Section 75 is still open. It's still possible for other developments to generate money towards this, but that's for another time and place, is my understanding. So the motion is before us to accept Councillor Emery's to be approved the option for disposal, but add the words that we should then look out in the private sector for opportunities to quickly have a purchase that could be used for these functions of short-term accommodation. Are there any other motions? I see a number of hands up of people who have already spoken. Do they want to speak again? Cassidy, Hardy, Curran. If not, remove your hands. Thank you very much. Councillor Curran, I think your hand's still up. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Right. There being one motion and no other contrary motions, despite the range of opportunities, I take it that this motion is therefore passed. Is there anyone of a contrary view? Speak now or forever hold thy peace. The motion, as I think amended, is therefore passed. And thank you very much, Councillor Emery, for your contribution and your interest in this topic. Item 8.7. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Fiona Robertson, a report for decision. Fiona?
Thank you, Provost. Yes, thank you, Provost. First of all, I'd like to apologise for the grammatical errors within the recommendations of this report. The purpose of this report is to provide the Council with a summary of the United Nations on the Rights of the Child Bill, as introduced in the Scottish Parliament on the 1st of September 2020, and to seek agreement that a response is sent to the Scottish Government setting out the Council's position and any potential implications for the Council, and seek assurance that these will be considered fully and addressed prior to the Bill's provisions coming into effect as a matter of law. So the first paragraphs 3.1 to 3.4 provide a background to the UNCRC, which is the most widely ratified human rights treaty in the world. And these rights set out in the UNCRC are guaranteed to every child, whatever their ethnicity, gender, religion, language, abilities, or any other status. And as also stated in our Community Planning Partnership Single Midlothian Plan, the partnership is also committed to realising children's rights approach to all of our work and making sure that we embed the principles of the UNCRC and it's important to note that the 3-year outcome and priorities for action have been informed by the views of over 500 children and young people. So the report also provides information on the anticipated impact on local authorities and the current stage of the bill. So the bill is currently at stage 1 and is being considered by the Equalities and Human Rights Committee. So the committee will invite views and representations from relevant bodies. And to be clear, the Scottish Government has indicated its commitment to further detailed engagement with local authorities. And it's anticipated that COSLA, SOLACE and SOLAR will all be invited to comment. And in fact, I will be attending a meeting tomorrow with the Scottish Government to discuss any implications for education. So it's anticipated that the incorporation of UNCRC into Scots law will impact upon local authorities as follows. At all levels of the council, in that we must not act incompatibly with the UNCRC requirements, that children will have a right to be heard and must be proactively consulted upon in any decisions which affect them. Impact assessments dealing with the impact upon children during all decision-making processes will be required, and it would be unlawful for public authorities to act incompatibly with UNCRC requirements. And we will be required to report every 3 years on how we comply with children's rights. So practical actions which will likely be required are a review of all our relevant policies, procedures, development of panels to seek children's views, development of standalone children's rights and wellbeing impact assessment toolkit, training on any changes in practice, and a development of toolkit to report to Scottish Government, and a review of changes within partner agencies. So as a result of the above, the Council is recommended to note the content of this report, agree that a further report is presented to Council setting out the potential implications for it of the incorporation of UNCRC into domestic law, to note that officers intend to work closely with COSLA, SOLACE and SOLAR in considering potential implications for the Council if the bill is incorporated into domestic law, and to ensure that the Council's position is relayed to the Scottish Government, either by sending a letter directly from the Council or by contributing to a response by COSLA, SOLAR and or SOLACE. Happy to respond to any questions, and Alan Turpey is here to assist with any queries related to legislation.
Thank you very much for that initial comment. I mean, as with so much that comes out of our Scottish Government, it's like a sort of menu without prices. Who will be paying for the implementation of these really excellent ideas, given the state of modern society?
Thank you. It's my understanding that that will be part of the consultation processes to look at any of the implications in terms of the resources that will be required at local authority level. That's a lovely way of saying we don't know. Thank you. But so the question of who pays will be something that will be brought forward in the next paper. Yes, it's a question that's already been asked in terms of the engagement process as part of the initial consultation prior to the bill being taken to Parliament as part of the first phase. And I'm sure that there will be further engagement. As stated, the Scottish Government are looking for detailed engagement with COSLA and other bodies. So I am sure there will be further discussion and further information forthcoming on any potential resources that will be required at a local authority level. Thank you. Diane Alexander and then Jim Muirhead.
Yes, thank you, Fiona, for that report, and I fully support the report and the way forward. Just one thing I do worry about is that when we give people rights, there's also the chance that by doing so we actually take away some of the rights that are there at the moment, or inadvertently reduce the rights in certain aspects. So I would just like to make sure that when the report is actually done and it's brought in, that we are not inadvertently reducing the rights in other respects.
Yes, the law of unintended consequences. Fiona, could you comment a little further as to whether there's a tension here with the existing provision, or indeed a tension with parents' rights? In the old days, kids used to wind up their parents by threatening to call S the ransom, and there may be some false calls that will occur under a more interventionist regime.
What I would, in terms of my response, I would say that's part of the legislation that will need to be explored in case there are any different acts that would be rubbing up against each other. So we have the Parental Involvement Act, and then clearly, obviously, if the UNCRC was incorporated into domestic law, they would need to look at the coherence across these two pieces of legislation. Again, just to say that the Children's Commissioner for Scotland is fully involved in this process, so I'm quite sure again that that the current Commissioner will be ensuring that there's no conflict and any reduction in terms of people's rights moving forward, and particularly in the interests of children. I'm quite sure that there will be more discussion on the various pieces of legislation and how they interact, so that there is that coherence across all of the legislation that is there to protect people's rights.
Thank you. And now, Jim Muirhead.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, when things like this come up to the council, it's almost like a no-brainer. We're all going to stick our hands up and absolutely agree to it, because it seems like the absolutely right thing to do. Who's going to vote against a convention on the rights of children? The reality is, though, that if we just do that, if we just stick our hands up and support it, then we're just paying lip service to it. It is vitally important that we actually get officers to look at what the implications of this is and how we will deal with them, how our procedures have to change to enable us to truly embrace and adhere to the principles of this charter. So, I think it's right. I'm glad we're taking that kind of step. There's going to be another report coming up with these kind of implications that we're going to fully engage with COSLA and the other representative bodies to try to get solutions to any conflicts. The point that Diane makes, are there conflicting things here with the way that we deal with things at the moment? All of that kind of thing needs to be looked at, acknowledged, and solutions found in order that we fully endorse this. I'm pleased in the report that we've also seen a recognition of the community planning partnerships involvement young people and our plans for moving forward for the next 3 years, and that Fiona makes the point that over 500 children and young people engaged in the process of determining what this council's priorities were going to be for 2020 to 23. We had a real lot of involvement there at that time in determining that. So I'm happy to support this, and I'm happy that we're going to be coming forward with a bit more meaningful information about what the implications of this are going to be, that we can truly buy into it in a way that's going to work.
Thank you, Jim. Of course, we're already conscious of the enormous amount of work that our staff have produced for the Get It Right for Every Midlothian Child policy. So I would hope nobody would come away from this discussion thinking that we're slouches or in any way behind the curve in terms of children's rights, children's protections. Jim, your hand's up. Diane, your hand's up. Any other contributions? Janet Leigh Douglas.
Thanks, Fiona, for that. Yes, thank you. Peter has just sort of taken the words out of my mouth with regard to that.
I apologise.
It's okay, no problem. The bill is obviously important, but equally important, the communication between the Scottish Government and the local authority, just to iron out any issues prior to implementation. So, as I won't reiterate what Jim said, but yeah, I'm actually in support of this paper. Thank you.
It's a report for decision. Is there anyone contrary minded? As predicted by Jim Muirhead, this is agreed by the council. Thank you very much indeed, Fiona, for that. And you're not out yet. It's next 8.8 early learning and childcare expansion update.
Okay, thank you very much, Provost. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update to council on progress with the implementation of the 1140 hours early learning and childcare. And the council was asked to note the progress made and the revised plans being taken forward to deliver 1140 funded hours by the end of October 2020. So previous reports to council indicated that we were on course for delivering the 1140 hours of funded early learning and childcare from August 2020, in line with our statutory requirement to do so. But members will be aware that the pandemic has had a considerable impact upon delivery plans across all local authorities, and this was recognised by the Scottish Government. So as a result, the Scottish Government paused the statutory requirement to deliver from August 2020, meaning that the statutory duty just now remains 600 hours. The Scottish Government has stated that they will provide at least 6 months' notice of the requirement to deliver 1140 hours. And the Scottish Government Early Years team is currently liaising with each local authority to assess readiness to do so. So Midlothian's Early Years team have already met with the Scottish Government officers and provided assurance that our revised plan will mean that we are able to offer 1140 hours from October 2020 onwards, albeit that this offer will be modified to take account of current national guidance to keep staff, parents and children safe across our communities, and the financial envelope available to offer the 1140 hours for all families. So throughout the lockdown period, we provided critical childcare for key workers and vulnerable children and families. And in line with national guidance, this support was provided through many of our partner settings, and an uplift was provided to those who remained open and who delivered this critical childcare. So it's anticipated that the expenditure on critical childcare will be around 800,000, and this has been funded from the flexibility given to us in the 1140 hours funding. We continue to work closely with our partner providers to support their sustainability, as they're key to the successful delivery of 1140 hours. And we are currently supporting the distribution of the Scottish Government's Transitional Support Fund for partner providers to cover additional costs associated with the pandemic, for example, cleaning, sanitizer, etc. So as previously stated, it is anticipated that by the end of October, all parents and carers in Midlothian will have an offer of 1140 funded hours. And this has been achieved as a result of effective partnership working with early learning childcare providers and the considerable efforts of the early years staff within the council. As set out in previous reports to council, the council received less funding for the 1140 hours expansion programme than the estimate submitted in February 2018. As a result of the reduced funding, the early learning childcare team have worked very closely with other council officers and partner providers to revise the delivery model, and financial prudence has meant that thus far we're managing to roll out the expansion programme. Further information on our revised model and delivery plan is included in the revised Appendix B. It is our understanding that the Scottish Government and COSLA will be working together on determining the funding mechanism for the early years from 2022-23 onwards, and the need to address the particular challenges facing local authorities with growing populations such as Midlothian was recognised recently at the Public Audit and Post-Legislative Scrutiny Committee in September 2020. So engagement with the Scottish Government and COSLA in respect of the review to establish the funding and distribution methodology will be of great importance for Midlothian to ensure that it properly recompenses local authorities with significant growth. And the Council may wish to note the projected expenditure detailed in the appendix that highlights the pressure on the Council's budget from 2022 to 23 onwards. Happy to take any questions.
Yes, on that last point, it does appear that although we've received something like 15 million for 2021 from the Scottish Government, quite a lot of the budget falls on us because the Scottish Government is working on out-of-date demographic statistics that understate the level of population in Midlothian. Would that be broadly correct?
It is correct that the funding distribution was based on a population census of 2014, which obviously is trailing behind the significant growth within Midlothian.
Councillor Leigh Douglas. Then Councillor Muirhead. Councillor Leigh Douglas, Janet. And then Councillor Muirhead. Jim, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm no now. Thanks, Provost. Thank you for that. Can I just start? I'd like to thank staff officers for the update here in front of us today, and for all the efforts that they've put in to get us into a situation where we're going to be able to deliver or start to deliver the 1140 by the end of by the end of this month. And I'd like to pay tribute and give my thanks just to the early year staff right across the board for the absolutely superb efforts that they've been putting in, as Fiona has said, during the pandemic and during the lockdown and since during the school holidays, and our partner providers as well, for all the efforts. And I think a lot of people have absolutely gone above and beyond to make sure that we were able to give that support to key workers and to our vulnerable families as well. Provost, we've been saying for many years that the funding that Midlothian receives for the Scottish Government doesn't keep pace with the impact of the rapidly growing population within our county, by far the fastest growing county in Scotland. Now, like this paper makes it clear, like all Scottish councils, we were asked the Scottish Government to provide an estimate how much it would cost us to implement the absolutely laudable and welcome 1140 hours policy. Across Scotland in total, councils estimated it would require just over £600 million to implement that policy. Subsequently, the Scottish Government provided a total of 566 million, some 6% less than councils had asked for. Then, lo and behold, when we get our allocation or resources for the Scottish Government, it's 24% less than we had asked for. Now, this estimate wasn't something that was plucked out of the air by our staff. It was based on a robust assessment of what we would require, given our knowledge of the expanding population. And that, as Fiona has indicated at the tail end of her contribution there, isn't just our opinion, it's also the opinion of the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government's own auditors, who have come out recently and specifically highlighted Midlothian as an exceptional case in terms of the shortfall in the funding that we require to implement our policy. We've had claims about being shortchanged in Midlothian for years, frankly, and it's all fell on deaf ears. But in this situation, we've been forced to make do with what we've been able to get for the government. Now, it's important that people understand that in order to bridge the gap between the funding we needed and the funding we received, what this paper shows is, as well as cut spending in other areas of the council in general terms, in order to maintain as much spend as we could in our biggest cost area, education, we've also had to carefully consider what we could actually offer in terms of the 1140-hour service. And as a result of that, there's been a number of changes. We had planned in Midlothian to have an early learning childcare hub in each of the learning communities operating all year, during the holidays as well, to provide an enhanced service for our more vulnerable children, with more flexible hours, increased staff numbers, and the potential for a range of linked services to be relocated or co-located, in that and these premises. We've not been able to provide any of these learning centres in any of our learning communities. I have to recognise, though, that we do continue to work closely with our partners in the health and the third sector to make sure that we provide the best service that's possible to our families that are most in need in these locations. I'm not taking anything away with the efforts that are being put in to try to address that. One of the guiding principles in the Scottish Government's 1140 policy is flexibility. And it's flexibility for parents and carers in work, training or study, and a commitment to offer patterns of provision better aligned with their working patterns and deliver this in a way that ensures that a high quality experience for the children. Now, while we continue to plan and provide for that high quality experience for every child in Midlothian, the reduction in funding has meant it's not feasible for us to offer that level of flexibility, a broader pattern of provision to better meet the needs of those in work, training or study. So that element here has suffered. Choice is another key component of the Scottish Government's programme, and it's been restricted here in Midlothian. The overall number of places that are available across all providers has been carefully considered, and settings have not been staffed to capacity. That's the reality. While places are still available in locality, restricting the numbers of available places is required to provide choice to parents. We've had to cut down on the non-ratio time available for staff training, so that's non-contact time, and staff training is vital to ensure that we're able to maintain the quality of the services that we provide. We've had to revise the balance between modern apprentices and qualified staff, increasing the number of modern apprentices that we employ, because it's cheaper to do that than employ qualified staff. I realise that there are positives in that as well, because it's equipping people, giving them opportunities to have that apprenticeship. That side of it's good, but there's an element of a cost-cutting measure in that. Some of the underspend that has been used to support the critical childcare during the lockdown over the holiday period is also an issue here. That's led to a delay in the recruitment of staff that we agreed to, and reduced the capacity in the council settings that would have been available in 2021, again reducing choice and flexibility. Now we've had to take these steps and other steps that I mentioned earlier, which local authorities that have been adequately funded, and there are a good number of them, haven't had to take. Now, for me, that creates an inequity in the quality and the choice offered in Midlothian in comparison to other councils which have been properly funded. Taking the steps that we've taken has enabled us to save around, or to store up about £3 million in the run-up to full implementation, which we knew would be needed to see us through to 22-23, when the Scottish Government have indicated that they might review the funding arrangements, and albeit that we've done so with a reduced level of service than we had originally planned. And I think that finally, Provost, you'll be glad to hear, we need to understand that £3 million that we've managed to carry forward and use to spread across that 3-year period is a finite amount of funding. It's not recurring income that we will have available to use each year. As the table that's on the paper that's in front of you shows, that carry forward will be exhausted in 2023. And my fear is, and I think it's plain for everybody to see, that unless the Scottish Government recognises and truly addresses the shortfall in the funding in Midlothian, even more of the early years services that the government's promised would be provided on an equitable basis across Scotland will not be able to be delivered here in Midlothian to the extent that it will be in other council areas. Where's the equity in that, Provost? Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm going to let that ball go to the wicket keepers in the shape of some of the members of the Scottish National Party. So I'm going to propose to go in the order Diane Alexander, then Stephen Curran to come back in, and then Colin Cassidy. Diane, your comments on that. Why are we not getting a fair cut of the action from the Scottish Government?
Well, as far as I am aware, that distribution comes from COSLA, and it is up to our leaders in COSLA to fight our case. And if they have not done so, then it isn't the Scottish Government's fault. It's the distribution that happens in COSLA. And I think that our leaders need to shout more loudly. And I'm sure that if they did, then the distribution would be more equitable.
I think I'm kind of used to shouting very loudly, but being in a minority, and in COSLA, hardly any authorities are growing as fast as us. So this is, a record playing that we've heard once or twice before. I don't think COSLA is inclined. I think a more scientific examination of Midlothian's position, which I think Jim Muirhead referred to, is now indicating that we are being poorly treated in terms of the implementation of the Scottish Government's policy here. Could I ask Stephen Curran to come in?
Thanks, Provost. Councillor Cassidy had his hand up before me, if you want to come in first.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Provost. I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Alexander was saying there. We have an obligation, a duty to the people of Midlothian to go to COSLA and fight for extra money. We are not doing that, as far as I can see. We've put the white flag up on several occasions when we go to COSLA and accept that the West Coast have more councillors who are Labour orientated and will give it to their own groups, and we are left as the poor cousins here in the East. Now, I may be wrong about this, but I've did a bit of research into this, and I find that this is the same story every time from every councillor from different councils I speak to, that Midlothian aren't getting on the table and shouting the loudest. They just accept what we're given. This has nothing to do with the Scottish Government. This is the Scottish Government give the money to COSLA, and COSLA distribute the money to the councils appropriately. We need negotiators at that table that will not leave that room until we get a better deal. And I, for one, would be happy to go through to COSLA and ruffle feathers. So I will fight for Midlothian every day of the week. I'd fight. I also don't see the problem. We're reaching our targets with 1140 hours at the moment. So I don't see what Jim's point is with this whole thing. We need to look to the future to get the money, the extra money in for Midlothian. Put me forward, I'll go and do it.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. And last time I met the Provost, Lady Provost of Glasgow, she's not there now. Glasgow was controlled by the SNP, I believe. Stephen, could we then hear from Stephen Curran and then Derek Milligan?
Thanks, Provost. This does have everything. I disagree with Councillor Cassidy. This does have everything to do with the Scottish Government. This is the Scottish Government's flagship policy. You know, this subject infuriates me because it's a good policy, but it's been unfairly funded by its funding distribution mechanism, which lets it down. And I'm going to call this mechanism exactly what I think it is. It's inequality verging on discrimination. And what's more is that it's our youngest learners and their families that are going to be paying the price for this because they happen to live in the fastest growing county in Scotland. And it's government ministers, as I understand, were also responsible for making this decision. An absurd, how they came to the rationale to use the 2014 population figures, who only knows, as the basis of the funding for the early years provision. So what does this mean, this 24% shortfall, the millions of pounds? In reality, what's the consequences? What's the shortfall? And well, I won't repeat the valid points that Councillor Muirhead raises. I will say that every other council in Scotland are in a position to offer families a wider choice because the respective councils have been more adequately funded than Midlothian have been. And although, to acknowledge as well, there are another 11 councils that were also underfunded, but just not to the extent that we have been. So it's our youngest learners and their families that are being denied the breadth of choice. And Councillor Cassidy had mentioned that we're reaching our targets. Yes, we've got Fiona and her team have managed to come up with a delivery model within the financial envelope. But it's our children and our families that are being denied the breadth of choice that's being offered elsewhere in other local authorities. You know, of the 1140 hours that it should offer, the choices that it was designed to offer, they're being denied for no other reason than the fact that our families happen to live in Midlothian. Where's the equality? Where's the fairness? You know, this is about our children's futures. This is about challenging the fact that our children and young families are being denied an equal opportunity in life. Our ambitions for our young learners have been derailed by this funding mechanism, and I would like parity for Midlothian. Some issues go beyond politics, beyond county borders, and this is one of them. It's our duty as elected members to hold government to account and fight for equality, for fairer funding for our families. That's my rant over, Provost. Thanks.
Thank you again, Councillor Curran, for that contribution. The Provost is attempting to have the parties in alternate order and therefore not exactly the order in which you put your hands up. So could I at this stage ask for Diane Alexander and then perhaps Jim Muirhead, if you could round up and summarise what's already been said.
I would just like to go along with what Colin Cassidy said, and I'm happy to go along to COSLA with him or on my own and fight our corner, because that is where this argument has got to be taken. The distribution has been agreed on many occasions to come from COSLA, and so it's back to COSLA that we have to go for this. And we can't then, you know, when the Scottish Government has, by agreement, put this argument to COSLA, I can't see how we can therefore take it back and say, okay, we need to put it back into the Scottish Government's hands for distribution. It is where it is, and we must fight our corner. And I am prepared to go there and fight for this. If we are the only county which doesn't have this fair distribution, we're obviously not doing our job at COSLA to get the right amount of money for our county. And you're right, it is our children that are suffering because of this, and probably not just our children, it's the county. The county is not being heard properly at COSLA, and that's where this has got to be taken up.
Okay, thank you again for recapitulating that argument. I'm going to ask Jim Muirhead to speak, and then I think for Derek Milligan, the leader of the council, to wrap up. This is for noting, and many of the points are starting to repeat. So please be brief. Jim.
Thanks, Provost. To be honest, Provost, when I made my statement, I hadn't intended that to be certainly not an attack on my fellow councillors who happen to be in the SNP. I'm making the argument against the position that the government has taken on this. I was really more looking for us to take a kind of joint approach to do whatever we can to influence whoever we can to get a better funding settlement for Midlothian. I think that's something we should all be working together to try to achieve. Councillor Councillor Cassidy, sorry, makes the point about he doesn't understand the point I'm making. We seem to have enough money. What I've illustrated, I think, here today is we've had enough money to get the service up and running between now and 22-23, because we've cut the services that we were going to be supplying, that the Scottish Government expect us to supply, in the run-up to get enough money to see us through that. So there's an inequity on what we are able to provide in comparison to the other councils that by definition must have got more than they asked for. Right, now there's something totally wrong with that. Now I'm not interested in getting into who's at fault here. I'm interested in finding a solution that we can all get behind and try to reach an agreement where we can all be pushing for the same thing. You talk again, Colin, about it seems to be okay as far as funding. I think what I also illustrated is that beyond 2023, unless there's a change, we're going to be in an even worse position, because we will only have that £300 million to supplement our spending going forward. Beyond that, it's no recurring expenditure. And I have to say, it's a wee while ago now, but when the Scottish Government was a Labour government, there were things that were done here that Midlothian Council, predominantly Labour, didn't like. And we were prepared to challenge the government. Yes, sometimes behind closed doors, but sometimes actually out in public. I can actually, I can't remember the exact issue, but I can remember Derek Milligan on the words, "I didn't care what Jack McConnell says," in public. We're looking for support to try to get a solution here, not to play games about who's to blame for it.
Thank you. And certainly from as leader of the Conservative group here, absolutely in favour of a cross-border approach to try and get some science into the calculation of the distribution of governmental funds to Midlothian. Derek Milligan, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, Provost, thank you. And first thing, I'm going to just get Gary Fairley to completely clear up here, is that when the funding distribution came out of COSLA, it was the Scottish Government that applied the 2014 matrix to the funding and payout. Gary, could you confirm that that's the case?
Yeah, happy to do so. And I think Councillor Muirhead said it in his earlier speech that the assessment of councils of how much resource was required was then taken by by Scottish Government and reduced, again using the population estimates of 2014. So the quantum that was to be distributed was set and determined by Scottish Government.
Okay, thank you. With that at the back of us up, perhaps puts to the back burner the fact that this wasn't a COSLA decision. It's the fact that we constantly see issues with distribution. Not just this council, neighbouring councils, Edinburgh, East Lothian, West Lothian, even the Health Board suffers for this time lag. But going to be back to 2014, when you see a massive population growth in Midlothian, you can understand why we want to get to there. And COSLA, it can be difficult at times because you've got 32 local authorities and each of the leaders voting for what's best for their authority. No, quite often, no on political grounds, more on what's best for them. But let's set that aside. The finance head of finance has already confirmed what I knew. The matrix to apply. The 2014 was actually a government one. The reality is, just like Jim here, I think it's really important. It's my intention to write to John Swinney to ask him for a meeting to discuss how we can go here, because when this was discussed at the Public Audit and Post-Legislative Committee at the Scottish Parliament, there seemed to be cross-party support for Midlothian at that. And I think there was a recognition, whilst the Scottish Government representatives didn't say that anybody had been overly funded, they say some councils would be more, I think, content with the funding than others, or less unhappy. But the reality is, I think there was an acknowledgement for the Scottish Government that applying the 2014 matrix, there were some unintended consequences from. So I think at this stage, given the fact that at the very start councils asked for a good chunk of money more than what was in there, I think going to speak to the Deputy First Minister would be a very first good step. So it's my intention to write to him to ask for that meeting. And I'd be quite happy for other political party reps to accompany me if the Deputy First Minister was happy to meet us.
I think that's a good note in which to conclude this item, which has certainly expanded in its scope well beyond just the 1140, but it is a vital foundation of our society that children have a good start in life and that everyone is able to work to their full potential. So we're all in favour of the policy. We're all looking for a better settlement for Midlothian. Can we now move on to 8.9, which I think is probably for Fiona to speak to. It's yet another menu without prices from the Scottish Government, I think, on the subject of the Learning Estate Investment Programme. Fiona?
Yes, thank you, Provost. This is just to bring to the Council's attention that the Scottish Government has announced phase 2 of the Learning Estate Investment Programme, and that we will bring an update to Council on our submission for phase 2. And to note that building on our successful bid in phase 1, we've already had an initial discussion with the Scottish Futures Trust re potential projects to submit for the second phase.
So we're well into the process of getting support for the expansion of our school estate. Are there any comments? We note this letter. Thank you very much. We have a replacement 8.10, which was recently supplied, I believe, the Midlothian Council supporting emergency food access, originally compiled by Annette Lang. Who would like to speak to this?
Provost, I will be speaking to this report, but Annette Lang will obviously be prepared to respond to any questions.
Thank you. Hello, Annette.
The purpose of this report is to outline the emergency food support options for Midlothian 2020-21 and onwards in order to respond flexibly to emerging demand and ensure that access to emergency food supplies respects the dignity and the human rights of members of our communities. So the report details how citizens have access to emergency food supplies during the emergency response period and how demand has reduced as we've moved from emergency lockdown and through the next phases of the pandemic. And we are thankful to the many volunteers who have supported food banks and distributed supplies to those in need. As we prepare for the event of low food supplies, the ongoing impact of the pandemic, the EU exit, potential increased unemployment and winter weather, we are seeking agreement from the Council to modify our approach in order that we have well-developed arrangements and plans in place to offer support whilst protecting the dignity and rights of our citizens. So first of all, we're asking the Council to agree Council support for direct access to the Serenians food share up to 10,000 and the provision of council vehicles in preparedness for any of the events just described, and also to agree the option for food vouchers and delegate authority to the Chief Officer for Children's Services and Communities and Partnerships to make the necessary arrangements to implement as a matter of urgency. Also, given the increased uncertainty around the implementation of further local or national restrictions, that as a matter of urgency, we put in place arrangements to provide a one-stop approach as set out in the report. I'm happy to respond to any questions, and Annette Lang, the author of the report, is also happy to provide further details.
I think it's a very good opportunity for us all to congratulate the food banks who have been operating during lockdown and the COVID restrictions. I think they've done a fantastic job in Midlothian. I often probably appear like Scrooge as we head towards Christmas, but all of this is very commendable. But is there any risk that it will actually be a black hole financially that because it's demand led, it's very difficult for us to control how much we're committing to here?
Annette, do you wish to take this question, or Gary? I mean, I'm quite happy to respond in the fact that obviously we would monitor demand and obviously change the approach in relation to the level of demand. Obviously, the demand has decreased since the emergency lockdown, and you'll notice the reduction in the number of food banks and also the number of referrals and requests. But obviously, given that as we move towards winter period and also the end of furlough and the impact of Brexit, we will have to monitor very carefully the demand. And again, we have within the report, there is a description of an approach in terms of 100,000 that would be that sort of sum, and how it would be provided for about 250 members of the community. But I have to say it's very, very difficult to set a sort of set amount, because each of the requests and referrals are very different. Obviously for the individual context. So again, it's very hard to be able to know what the level of demand and the level of ask will be. But I'm happy for Annette and Gary to provide further information for you.
Diane Alexander.
Yes, I take note of the report, and I think that there are many good things going to happen with it. I'm just disappointed and shocked that in this day and age and in such a well-developed country that we have come to a situation where people are relying on the third sector to feed themselves. I'm glad to see that there's way forwards where people may be it's more respectful to people, that they're getting a money handout where they can actually choose what they want to buy, because getting getting food from a food bank where it's very welcome and it's very necessary, but where people may not eat the actual ingredients, where it's not their daily choice of food. I think it's disrespectful to expect people to just eat that because that's what's been given, but to give them money to choose themselves, I think is the right way forward. I've heard so many comments about the Scottish Government and what the Scottish Government isn't doing. But I think it's awful that we are now, with a pandemic that's happening, that nobody thought about, that nobody expected to come. And on top of this, we're going to have Brexit. And I am just so fearful about what's going to happen to the populations, both in Scotland and elsewhere. And I think it's tragic that we're not looking to ways around how we can prevent the disaster that's coming towards us. And I think that we also need to look at sustainability. So what are we doing about sustainability going forward, actually helping people in a time of dire need, how they can help themselves, perhaps by growing their own food. So yes, I'm happy with the way forward that the third sector, etc., are going to be looking at this. But I'm just so ashamed that people are, in this day and age, in such a technological society, that this is how this is what it's come to.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. I'm conscious that time's moving on. I propose that we have a 20-minute break at 1 o'clock, and that will probably mean I'm attempting to curtail the discussion on this or shape the discussion of this to fit that timetable if possible, or if we finish this discussion earlier, we'll break then. Could I therefore have Councillor Winchester?
My apologies, Provost. I was away with the fairies and should have declared an interest in this. Obviously, just about everyone knows that I sit on the trustees board of a food bank. I'll take advisement from Alan whether I should actually leave or not.
Thank you, Chair. If you're declaring an interest, Councillor Winchester, then you should leave for the duration of this item. If I understand from the Provost that he would then be calling a short adjournment, so I can send you an email as to when the meeting resumes at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Winchester. And could I therefore call on Councillor Cassidy? Colin, you're muted, I'm afraid. Colin?
Sorry, I'm saying I think Derek was before me.
Yeah. So be it.
I'll go now. It was just in reply to a comment you made, Provost, about the cost of this and the menu without prices. I'm kind of take umbrage at that, because I think that we are in special circumstances here, absolutely unbelievable time in our history, and I don't think money really is the biggest concern at this moment. I think that what this report is highlighting is what we're prepared to do, standing up for the people of Midlothian and for the people that are less well off than ourselves and will need this help at a vital time when there'll be children going without food, there'll be parents going without food. The price of everything, the cost of nothing, is it doesn't come into my horizon at the moment, I'm afraid.
Yes, I deliberately described myself as Scrooge, but I do think we have a duty to the public purse to know where this is going, and I accepted the response that we will be monitoring it and therefore be able to see how the distribution is going and whether or not it's starting to impact on the rest of our contingencies. So maybe a question of budgetary planning and showing that we know what this vital activity is going to cost as far as that is possible. But I agree with you, it is demand-led. Derek Milligan.
Thanks, Provost. I agree with Colin wholeheartedly here. I mean, we're in an unprecedented time here. I don't think anybody's ever thought we've seen anything like this coming or hopes to ever see it again. I just hope this doesn't cost us a penny, but however, I think as furlough ends and you start to see more and more businesses folding, you're going to start to see a glut of people who've never had to use the benefits system before. And I think on that point, it's just about looking to make sure we're using the right wording on things. You know, it's coming away from the wordings that they're handouts or that they're help or what have you. It's people's entitlement. I mean, the one thing, irrespective of what the cost is that we should never have a family waking up in the morning and not being able to feed their children. That's the one thing we need to be absolutely sure of. I've never been a lover of the voucher system, but I'm now convinced that that's the way to go, because quite frankly, I agree with the much talked about dignity part of this. Having folk queuing up outside food banks or having to go along to a community hall to pick up food to feed your family, there isn't any dignity in that at all. So actually using the voucher system, as long as it's well restricted for the normal to food use only, I'm absolutely fine with, because we need to get this right. irrespective of what the cost is here, we need to make sure that people aren't going without food and people feel secure in their houses. The one thing that I would say, Fiona, the measurement of this being a success or a failure will be on if somebody phones the one number we put out there and they didn't need to phone another number. That'll be the measurement of success for me. So is that we're not simply having phone calls to say, phone this one for this one for this. If we have a whole systems approach, our community planning partnership has been working very, very well. We're always talking about how well we work with the third sector and with other providers. This is the big trial for it, because if this is working as well as we think, they should phone one number and that should be hit. The health system approach should come in, and then anybody who needs to, any contact that needs to be done should be the other way around. So make sure whether it's for heating, lighting, Department of Works and Pensions, anything at all, that's all there. If they're needing help with getting prescriptions, whether they're needing food delivered or whether they're wanting it's all there. And there's a vital role for everybody to play in here. And let's just hope it doesn't get as bad as what the predictions say that it's going to be. However, I'm not going to hold my breath to that. I think we need to agree this today, and we'll get further reports in the November Council as to updates on this.
Kelly Parry, and then Andrew Hardy, and then Diane Alexander. Kelly.
Thanks, Provost. I'll try and keep this brief. Just a couple of points to raise, actually. Firstly, is a question, Fiona. It's just around the locations of some of the food banks. So I just thought some of the locations was a bit patchy, so there's no food bank in Midlothian West, and I was just a bit concerned about people who might have to travel either to Bonnyrigg or Pennycook, and might be the same circumstances in Woodburn as well. So just wanted some reassurance that, you know, I see there's delivery options there. It's just to make sure that the infrastructure there is robust enough to cover that. Secondly, just on the topic of cash versus vouchers, I think it's not best practice at all to use a 100% voucher system. It's actually a system that we used to use for asylum seekers many years ago, and was ruled to be against their human rights. So I think a humane approach to cash and vouchers where it's appropriate. I appreciate that there will be circumstances where people would prefer vouchers, but I wouldn't like to see an exclusive voucher system. And the last part is just to ask, during the pandemic phase, I had asked for a very small discretionary fund. Maybe that's something that could be done through the social welfare fund, but just to make sure there was a very small fund there for emergency situations of women who were experiencing violence in the home, or people who might be at risk of commercial sexual exploitation.
Fiona, do you want to respond on that?
Certainly, at this current moment in time, our social work services already use a voucher scheme, and that obviously supports members of our community during emergency periods. And so we know that that system currently works well. In terms of voucher versus cash, I mean, clearly in terms of vouchers, we can be assured that the funding, the voucher is going towards, you know, food to feed the family, etc. So that's always been the preferred route, is providing vouchers. And in terms of the food bank locations, again, I think Annette may have better intelligence than I do to hand in terms of their locations, but part of the proposal is about the using the council vehicles for delivery, which would probably assure you in terms of the areas across Midlothian. But I'm happy to ask Annette to expand on the sort of locations and why they were during the emergency lockdown in those areas.
Thank you. And Andrew Hardy, then Diane Alexander.
Thank you, Provost. It was just really, I just wanted some clarification on a few of the recommendations, particularly the first one about the access to a vehicle for the Serenians group, whether or not that would be a vehicle provided by the council or a vehicle provided and driven by the council, and also whether or not we are able to provide an appropriate vehicle, because obviously if we're talking about adverse weather conditions, you know, particularly Pennycook, in the last couple of years, we've seen, you know, several feet of snow on some occasions. We wouldn't want someone feeling that they're obligated to go out and try and deliver things to people in a small hatchback through several feet of snow, when as long as we could have an appropriate vehicle for those kind of conditions. And then the other point I wanted to make was on the delegation of powers to the officer. I'm just conscious that this could involve potential large amounts of spending, and I just have concerns about no elected member involvement. Obviously, I appreciate these decisions might be made on a very quick need-to-know basis, so not appropriate to come to full council. But as long as we could have some sort of liaison, even if it was just with the group leaders, so that there was some accountability for elected members in those decisions, particularly if there's large amounts of spending involved. So that was just the points I wanted to make.
Yes, if you want to come back on that, have we got the right vehicles, and will there be some involvement as we get feedback as to the actual use of cash for this?
And again, yes, we did use council vehicles during the emergency response period, and in line with our winter planning, obviously we would switch to the appropriate vehicles to be able to cope with winter weather. In terms of the governance, we are fortunate to have a weekly cross-party group meeting, and our chief officer attends that meeting and provides an update on all matters relevant to children's services and communities and partnerships. So again, in terms of governance, we would be able to share information at that meeting that would be taken back to the groups to provide that assurance that we're monitoring in terms of the amount of funding for the food access.
And Diane?
Yes, I just wanted to ask about, we're saying that we would perhaps not fund cigarettes and alcohol. I just wonder if there is some way to fund patches for people who smoke, because that could lead to stress and antisocial behaviour, possibly violence or whatever in the home. So I just think it's important that we also perhaps fund those.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. I was also, indeed, Derek Milligan touched on this, a little unsure as what we were actually going to be doing with cigarettes and alcohol. The policy seems a bit flexible. Do we know one way or the other? And what about patches? Fiona?
Again, I think based on individual circumstances where people were requesting, for example, alcohol, etc., that would be a discussion with our health partners. But this is clearly it's a food access fund that we are advocating today. So any one-stop shop you mentioned earlier, anyone phoning in and they're requesting alcohol, cigarettes, again, often there would be a connection with health partners in relation to any such request. But just to reiterate, this is emergency food access that we're recommending within this report.
Thank you for that clarification. Jim Muirhead, happy if you could round off the discussion.
Oh, I don't know if I'm going to round it off, Provost. I just wanted to put another, just a relatively small thing. There's been some discussion here about the benefits, or or the necessity sometimes consider cash versus vouchers. I'm just wondering, and I realise it might be a slightly longer term thing, but has there been any discussion about the possibility of the issue in the cards that we can preload with a certain amount of money, so that people didn't even have the, because there could be a certain indignity in going in with a voucher to the local store, whereas if you had a card that would be anonymous to a certain extent, you go up to the machine and you cash your way out. Nobody has to know what the background to you having that is. Is that a potential possibility, and could it even be that we can develop it in such a way that it actually restricts what the person's able to purchase with it?
Fiona, part of the dignity agenda, which I'm sure we all agree with.
Yeah, I would have to defer to Annette for the discussion around a card versus the vouchers. What I can say is that vouchers are, can be purchased by anyone in the community, not just anyone in need, whereas the card may well actually indicate that they have accessed the emergency food fund from the council. But I would defer to Annette to provide any further expansion on my response. Thank you.
Do we want a response by email in some detail about this? It sounds to me like one of these rather granular things where it may be difficult to just communicate straight away what the options are. Is Annette available to comment? Jim, would you be happy to have an email response?
I think Annette's waiting to come in, but if I'm happy with that. I realise it's a longer term suggestion. It might not be feasible, yes. But I just wanted to lay it on the table.
Yes, and if all the councillors could be filled in with a discussion as to the viability of using cards and anything that increases the dignity aspect and avoids any sense that there's something wrong falling into the circumstances we now have. I think we have to pursue that. Annette, I think you're there. Are you happy to compose an email on that subject?
Absolutely. I suppose this report is about giving governance to go forward and develop and respond to the points that have been made, and it gives us the governance to do that. So yes, I can respond in email and give more detail as we develop that. It's about having the flexibility to respond rapidly to any changing situations that come forward quite quickly, possibly. So more than happy to do that.
Thank you. A report for information as trailed. I think we should now have a 20-minute break and come back for paper 811 on the subject of the CES plan indicative regional spatial strategy. Can I thank you all for your participation this morning and see you in 20 minutes time. Can I welcome you all back, and can we now look at item 811 on page 93, the CES plan indicative regional spatial strategy. Kevin.
Thank you, Provost. This report provides members with the CES Plan Joint Committee papers in relation to the Indicative Regional Spatial Strategy, which is also included. The Planning Scotland Act 2019 introduced this spatial concept to guide the national planning framework and local development plans. The Regional Spatial Strategy is due to be produced by this autumn, following a delay due to the COVID disruption that's been experienced. The strategic themes of recovery and renewal, environment, climate change, transport, digital and housing also align to those of Midlothian Council in our own route map, and members will appreciate that Shawfair is one of the 7 strategic sites in this regional area, and members are recommended to ratify the Joint Committee's decision. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And my understanding is CES plan is winding down, so this is a bit of a sort of swan song for it.
It's certainly one of the final strategic tasks that the joint group need to resolve and complete, yes.
And Russell Emery, I think, should appropriately speak to this, and his hands up. Russell.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Provost. Just to say that following on from the Executive Director's report, this whole thing came about with CES Plan 2, the regional strategy being rejected by the Minister, not by the reporter, but by the Minister, prior to the Planning Act being passed through the Scottish Parliament. As a result of that, everything seems to be moving, dare I say, to the centre, and it will be all looked at through National Planning Framework 4. Now, the opportunity has arisen here for the southeast of Scotland to get something in by way of an interim regional spatial strategy submitted for Scottish Government to look at in light of the NPF 4 coming forward. So it's about trying to, as the Executive Director said, trying to influence the route map for the southeast of Scotland and as it goes forward. We've had our CES plan meeting, and it's now coming to the 6 authorities for endorsement. On the other aspect, Provost, you're absolutely correct. It will run down. It may be more than 2 years away, the rate things are going, but so it will still be in existence. And one could say, who knows what kind of structure we'll have in the future, because that's part of the guidelines that will come out from Scottish Government. So really, just ask the Council to, dare I say, endorse this today and move the agenda forward. Thanks.
Thank you. And on that structural thing, my understanding is we're actually getting 50,000 a year back from this entity, and they've assured me, favourite subject, that there's no long-term pension liabilities liable to fall on Midlothian. So you're in accordance with that. I'm not sure we can influence this very much. It's marked as for decision, but it's very difficult to overturn. But does anyone have leading comments on it they'd like to make? In which case, 8.11, it's decided that we support the CES Plan Strategic Development Plan. Can we now move to 8.12? Introduction of tariffs for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Kevin Anderson.
Thank you again, Provost. This report is recommending an introduction of tariffs across the Council's vehicle charging infrastructure. Clearly, we welcome the switching trend of motorists to electric vehicles and their use in terms of Midlothian's climate change strategy and aims. The report details the increasing kilowatt usage and costs at our metered facilities at Sheriff Hall, Dalkeith and Pennycook, with the remainder of our charging facilities which are within the total electricity billing for those respective sites. We have 21 chargers supplied by the Council, and 17 are supplied in private locations across Midlothian. Due to the increasing costs of the infrastructure, its maintenance and the electricity supply, it's recommended to approve the charging structure as is listed in section 2.6 of the report, which has been benchmarked with other local authorities and private businesses within Midlothian. It's proposed to use the Charge Your Car network as a management system, which provides an app and an access card, as this provider administers the scheme, the alerts, reports faults, and supplies charging data, and also for users provides the network mapping and collects the payments. There's also the potential to extend that role into the management of our own electric fleet at a later date. Thank you.
Have we comments? Janet Leigh Douglas.
Hi. Yeah, Kevin, thank you. I'm in complete agreement that the council should be charging for electricity, and I think the tariffs are reasonable. To be honest, it's a mystery to me why people think they should get their electricity free at the council's cost. I've had very positive constituent feedback on this. Electric cars are expensive and fuel costs low for them. But to be quite honest, if you can afford an electric car, you could afford to pay for the electricity. A couple of points I would like to just raise on that would be the map of charging points. I often get feedback that there is an issued map of charging points and it doesn't always indicate what points are available to the public. So I think there's a slight accessibility issue there, possibly. And maybe if someone drives to one of those points that's on that, that map, that often there's a barrier down, so they're unable to use it. So therefore, it's just having some sort of clarity on where chargers are. And a couple of messages, about contactless payment, as we do in petrol stations. I think there seems to be quite a few cards around to be able to use the charging points, and just think that that may be an easier method. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. And I also see that Diane Alexander would like to comment.
Yes, I just wonder if we could use the money raised through charging to collect more green energy, so we could start using solar panels and perhaps wind to actually electrify these charging points, so that they eventually become totally green.
That's a sort of kind of technical question. It might be quite difficult to avoid using the grid to get the degree of charge on a reliable basis, I'd have thought. Kevin.
Certainly concur with you there, Provost, but certainly I think the point is well made, and it's one that we'll take away in relation to our climate change strategy that was recently agreed at Council, and the respective working group looking at all those opportunities for renewables and recycling. I'll just pick up on Councillor Leigh Douglas's points. We've noted those to take those away in terms of the supplier to ensure that there is active mapping information. I know that does operate on the basis that she indicates, certainly for the e-bikes scheme. So I don't think it should be too difficult in the technology to ensure that's provided for cars as well. My colleague Alison White has indicated to me that she is able to answer in further detail from her personal experience, I'm aware, if we are willing to hear from her.
I think that'd be a very good idea. Alison.
Yeah, sorry. Just in terms of, there are quite good apps out there that will be quite clear about which charging points you can use at different points in time. So as an electric car user, there is actually really quite good information about the networks and whether those charging points are currently active or not. We might need to check it. To be fair, I've not checked Midlothian House car park in terms of how that's registered, but those would be the only ones. The rest of them are quite clearly identified. And it is a contactless point for payment at those machines when you are needing it, because obviously I have needed to, although I don't in Midlothian currently. In other places, the charge card allows you to do that through a direct debit that comes out for the payments that you're needing to make. So it is a really quite straightforward and contactless approach to being able to pay for the charging points.
That's good to know. Thank you very much. John Hackett.
Thank you, Provost. I think it's a real success story to see, well, regrettably not the increase in the cost of electricity, but the fact that costs have doubled for the council in the sense that more people are using the facility. And as the number of facilities grow, and I know through some of the planning applications that we've seen at Planning Committee, there's proposals there to have charging points in some of the new developments. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to introduce a modest fee for people to pay, and that will help us invest, as Councillor Alexander has suggested, that it gives us cash at least that we could be using for our response to climate changes here in the county. So yes, I'd like to support the recommendations in the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Colin Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking from a personal point of view as well, same as Alison, I have some electric vehicles here, and I didn't know up until I read this paper that we gave out free electricity in doing my homework, but I would never have dreamt of taking up this facility when I have my own charging facilities at home here. But I welcome this report because, for an example, my son has a car, an electric vehicle, and he used to spend over £100 a week on fuel. He's now lucky to use £20 worth of electricity. So I think if we're saving that kind of saving, the people that are using their electric cars are going to be quids in, even if they have to pay a few pound a week to charge their cars. So I welcome this.
Thank you very much, Colin. I see that Janet has her hand up. Janet Leigh-Douglas.
Sorry, yes. Just to go back to Kevin's point, thanks, Kevin, for that, because I think that would be helpful with regard to the comparison you made to the e-bikes. I think the constituent, I mean, Colin's just highlighted there that he didn't know Midlothian Council gave free electricity, but it was just that the constituents' feedback that I have had is from sort of elderly people who don't feel that they can actually, you know, access, they don't always feel that they know exactly where Midlothian Council points are. So it was just to raise that. Yeah. Thank you very much and fully support this.
Yeah, I'd very much like to bring in Diane Alexander and her charming companion. Can you tell me the name of your charming companion, Diane?
This is Alba, and she's a white schnauzer.
Oh, that's very rare. Yes.
All the way from Prague. Anyway, I was going to say a friend of mine who lives up the road, she has had solar panels in her home for a number of years now. And she also has an electric car, and she is now running her car cost-free because the electricity that she's produced over the years has covered the cost of the solar panels, etc. And now she's living almost cost-free of energy. So I think it's something that we need to look towards, and perhaps putting solar panels on all our council buildings, etc. going forward.
I'm going to let that pass quickly to Kevin Anderson. What's our current policy on solar panels on council housing, social housing?
Yes, we do. We have, and we continue to look at all other forms of renewables being employed in our construction through the social housing programme. Similarly, I know our property colleagues are doing the same in terms of the other built estate and our schools similarly as well. So we do certainly look at every opportunity to deploy that across the built estate. Provost, you're muted.
Apologise. I see that Colin Cassidy and Janet Leigh-Douglas still have their hands up. And on that note, I would therefore ask that we adopt the policy decision to charge for electricity as set out in the paper. Is there anyone contrary to that view? There being none, could we now move to paper item 8.13? It's an additional paper, so it may be in a different section of your emails. Care for People Group response to lockdown. Alison White.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this is a really positive report for you, and it really is just wanting to ensure that people are aware of the actions that were taken by the Council's Care for People group throughout lockdown period, and I suppose an opportunity for us to reflect on what worked well and the lessons learned from that period as we move into winter. And obviously the paper that you've already taken around the food issues that Annette had, and Fiona had presented previously. So Care for People group established in 2012, which is a response to legislation and guidance relating to civil emergencies, and its remit is very much to undertake that coordinating role across agencies and communities in the provision of humanitarian assistance during emergency situations. Throughout this period in our response, our activity and primary focus was about supporting people to stay well during lockdown in terms of physical and mental health, including those people that were at risk of health inequalities. And in addition, it was recognised that some of those people would be under increased financial pressures, and some of the ways that we could potentially do a short-term contribution to reducing the gap in those financial circumstances and difficulties that they were. The group sort of oversaw the work that we did around shielding, and as you'll see from the report, there's a real depth and breadth of work that was undertaken across all of the partners that were involved in the Care for People, and it was an opportunity for us to ensure that we weren't duplicating work and that where possible we were able to share resources, particularly when we were thinking about some of those resources in terms of the numbers of volunteers who fantastically throughout this period came forward and looked to us assist. And as you'll see from that, I mean, there were 25,000 interventions throughout that period, and not counting the food bank that we had also delivered throughout this period. Really what we're looking for is for you to note the work that was undertaken through this period and agree for that to be much more widely disseminated, and really looking as well that we can communicate some of that good work so that people are fully aware of what happened throughout that lockdown period. I'm happy to take any questions.
And we've already had a joint announcement by the three leaders in Midlothian Council, very much congratulating our own staff in the roles they adopted in the COVID lockdown, and also congratulating the third sector, which is such a strong factor in Midlothian community life. Could I have further contributions from the floor? John Hackett.
Thank you, Provost. No, it was quite exceptional, the community response and the council staff. I mean, we had accountants doing home care and, you know, people lifting bins and all sorts. People just overnight literally changed their role in terms of service delivery for the council. And I know there was a fantastic response. Just looking at my own ward, it was quite mixed. I know in the report, it says there was only one sort of official resilience group that had been established at the start. But I know, take Councillors, for example, in my ward, they have a very well long established group that centres around the village hall, normally operates over winter. So things like prescription collection and supporting neighbours is well rehearsed in a community like that. So it might not be officially recognised, but it's certainly there. Obviously with changes to the way pharmacy collection was delivered, and I know it's pleasing to see that there's going to be a review of how that works in the future. To Mayfield, which delivered thousands and thousands of hot meals to local residents, and to the S-Bank and New Battle Community Council, which had a complete change in community councillors some weeks prior. So not only were they trying to learn how to become community councillors, they also had to respond to a global pandemic in the local area, and each of them responded very differently, which I think is important when we look at, particularly ahead of winter. It's not a blanket one size fits all right across the county. It's important that what we do as a council support the way the community operates, what they see as fit for them. And obviously there will be gaps in that as well. So it's making sure that the council are working with local communities and where needed, stepping in to support individuals. I do agree with all of the recommendations and reviews that are at the tail end of the report. I think that's a fair opportunity to have a look at how we can improve things looking ahead, and hopefully winter is not as bad as I might be thinking it is, but it's best to be prepared in my view. I think just reflecting on the role of local councillors in this, we did have the leadership group, as the Provost alluded to, that was used as a reference point throughout the pandemic. But I'm wondering if there is another role for local councillors in this, not to hold things up, but to support the process as well and help contribute to some of the local knowledge when we're looking at how we might respond again over winter and beyond.
So the question there, Alison, is are there further lessons we can learn, particularly about councillor involvement in protecting our most vulnerable should the winter prove to be very difficult for all sorts of reasons?
Opportunities, and we can look at that. Certainly, as it says in the report, we've used the Care for People approach on a number of occasions, from the resettlement of refugees and to the gas leak and obviously the issues that we were having in Gorbridge. So we've taken slightly different approaches, and at different times there have been elected member involvement if it has been relevant to a particular area. Obviously the challenge with this and the Care for People that it would potentially involve all of you in terms of the areas that you're covering, but whether or not, if there was representation from elected members, can certainly extend that invitation or arrange an alternative to meet with group leaders to be able to share the information that's happening of the Care for People group. So whichever would make most sense for yourselves, we can accommodate, certainly.
So an opportunity for us to interface with the groups who could be active should there be further COVID or winter emergency measures required. Thank you. I also see Kelly Parry.
I think Colin had his hand up first, actually, Provost.
Deferring to Colin. Colin, hello.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Provost. I'd just like to reiterate some of what John, Councillor Hackett, was saying. The work that was done by our council employees was nothing short of heroic over that period of unprecedented times. The one thing I would point out, though, is the general public don't seem to realise the pressure that this council was under, and you see it still on social media talking about the recycling centres being opened and why aren't they fully open and why is there queues. They don't understand that people that never do that job are being pulled in to do that job, that people are shielding, and we have this. That's a message I think we need to get out to the general public. And I know a lot of my colleagues don't like social media, but it is a medium that people use to beat the council at times. And I'm on there defending it time and again, telling people to draw themselves in. That I used to be one of these people, by the way, that would have jumped in without knowing, in ignorance. And I now know what our people do behind the scenes and at the front line as well. I'd also just like to say I think John Hackett's hexed the winter by saying it's not going to be as bad as he thought. But no, I think I've been going out with community groups delivering food throughout the pandemic. And the one thing I would emphasise in my community, the elderly people I've been going to with food, I know this is going to sound strange, but they are delighted to see me at the door. They're delighted to see an elected member coming to their door, and it gives them, I'm maybe the only person they've seen that day, me and the person that I'm with delivering the food, and they just want to chat. The isolation has been horrendous for these people, and you see them just going down and down. And I think we have a duty as elected members to pay heed to that and try and do as much as we can in our communities at this time to try and get through it. But Alison, I admire what your area has done, what you've done in the council. So thank you very much.
Thanks again. Can I then move on to Kelly and then Debbie and then Joe? Kelly Parry.
Yeah, just reiterating a couple of the points there. I think what council staff, local authority staff, all over Scotland and Midlothian did was phenomenal. And volunteers as well in our communities, and a lot of the volunteers, certainly I know in my own ward, were older people as well. So, they were really taking a massive risk doing what they did in their communities. So they should absolutely be applauded. Just looking at some of the recommendations on the end, Alison, I agree with all of them. And I think it's right that we really learn from, what happened. Did we miss anything? I'm just a little bit concerned about the timings for taking some of those recommendations and reviews forward. You'll be aware that Midlothian's rate of COVID is quite high at the moment, and I'm sure that's cause for concern for many of us. Is there a way that we can rapidly learn lessons from that in case Midlothian is an area that has to face tighter restrictions sometime soon?
And that's, of course, a major question, because we have at some stages been, apart from central Glasgow, one of the worst areas in Scotland. I think it's not quite so critical at the moment, but is anyone brave enough to do an analysis of quite why Midlothian's been in this situation? Possibly Grace, if she's around. I don't know if she's available. Or Alison.
Thanks, Provost. Just to say that that's something that the IGB and NHS Lothian are already looking at, and further updates will come in due course. I would also agree with Councillor Parry, we're not through this yet, so that we don't want to make that analysis too soon, but more data will be coming via the IGB and can forward that into Council, Provost, if that would be of use.
Yes, indeed. Could I ask Debbie McCall to join the conversation?
Thank you, Provost. I noticed that Morag Barrow just put up her hand, so I don't know if Morag wanted to come in.
Certainly, yes, there she is.
About that first.
Hi, thank you. It was actually just to say what Grace has. Public Health and NHS Lothian are looking at this along with some of the national modelling work's been done looking at phase 2 COVID as well. So we do expect to perhaps get some information back, but it is going to be multifaceted. There's not any one area, if you like, being the main focus of this. And I think Kelly is absolutely right. You know, we need to be mindful of this moving forward. We have got spread in different areas than we had last time within Midlothian this time. So Kelly, I think from Alison and I's point of view, we will be doing everything we can to move this forward at pace.
Thank you. And Debbie?
Thank you, Provost. Really just wanted to pay tribute to the volunteers in my ward. The ambassadors have done an amazing job, and I'm glad to see that that's recognised in the report under the medicines. We basically had 3 women who were working full time pretty much in doing the pharmacy pickups and deliveries, and also things have moved on from that, and the ambassadors have now sorted out a little shop in the precinct doing school uniform handover. So that's been really successful. But just to echo what Councillor Parry said, we're not out of the woods yet, and it's a real concern that we're just into October now, and our numbers are going up, and Midlothian has been hovering at the top of the list there. So that really is a concern, and I'm very pleased to hear that it's being addressed.
Thank you, Debbie McCall. Councillor Joe Wallace.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I unfortunately was a shielded person, so I couldn't get out and about to do any work in the community. But thanks to Councillor Debbie McCall, who volunteered and helped along with the other ambassadors to deliver food and medications to our most vulnerable people in society. I unfortunately didn't have to call on them too many times, because I have family and friends that were able to deliver food and to go to the chemist on my behalf. But anyway, I want to thank all the other people that have helped throughout Midlothian during this horrible time, and hopefully we didn't have to enter it again, but I'm afraid that it looks awfully like we may have to.
I share your concern on that. Can we hear from John Hackett?
Thanks, Provost. Just with respect to Alison's suggestion there, could I propose that a member from each group could join the Care for People group, if that would be feasible?
Do you want that put to the groups so that at their next group meetings they can determine who will be involved, who's best to be involved?
That would make sense rather than putting people on the spot just now, I think.
Okay, all the group leaders hear what you say.
Just to confirm, that the meeting is currently happening every third week, so it's a 3-week cycle. At the height of the pandemic, we were meeting on a weekly basis, but at this point in time, it is a 3-weekly basis that we're meeting. But if I get nominations, then I can forward the invitation on to yourselves.
Perhaps it would help if either you, Alison, or perhaps Verona, just send the group leaders the exact dates of the meeting so that everyone can work out that they're actually able to attend and contribute. Is it the third week of each? Jim Muirhead.
Thanks, Provost. If I could just take the opportunity to give a shout out for the resilience group that worked in the Gore Bridge area during the lockdown in particular and beyond to an extent, and to recognise that they were one of the first out the starting blocks when the lockdown occurred, and just to make the particular point with regards to the Gore Bridge area, is that it wasn't one organisation that took charge yet. There was 3 organisations involved that have kind of complementary roles within the community, and they all worked really well together to be able to deliver all the services to people during that period for the physical help like shopping and medicine deliveries and things like that, through to the mental health support in terms of Gore Bridge Cares in particular, who I certainly know that my mother, being somebody who was shielding, really welcomed the calls that she received from them, and they would spend about half hour on the phone, talking to her, and that meant really a lot. And it wasn't just about the delivering the food; there was also that kind of support. But I think it needs to be recognised that certainly in the Gore Bridge community, that these 3 organisations worked really. I'm sure there was things going on in the background that I'm not aware of, but from our perspective, absolutely seamlessly, and work together to really achieve some excellent results.
Thank you, Councillor Muirhead. Derek Milligan, the leader.
Yeah, Peter, I think when we get down to picking out the individual groups, and if people are quite right to do so, there's that be danger that we miss somebody. So I'm not going to pick out any specific group. I'm just going to say that I think all the groups done their best, and quite often it was people who were looking after kids or who had elderly relatives. It was absolutely fantastic to see a lot of the community coming out there, and I think Colin made the point, actually, it wasn't just the delivering a bit of food or stuff like that, it was actually that contact for people when you was the only person you were seeing that day. I think that was a bit, certainly for the council staff who were contacting Shielder, a lot of the Shielders that I spoke to in the Bonnyrigg area and across the Midlothian were absolutely complimentary massively about the contact that they had got for staff. And I think we should always remember, whilst at this time we're talking about our volunteers that came forward, there are a lot of people out there, an awful lot of people, whether that was bus drivers, shop assistants, our care at home staff, our nursing home staff, just right across the board, came to the fore. And I think it just actually shows quite often we think that some of the spirit of the 40s and that hadn't here any longer. I think it just shows that when things start to go wrong, that people start to step up.
Thank you, and I think we're all highly positive towards the content of this paper. And can I thank Alison White very much for her enormous effort during this period, and I'm sure it's also going to be quite a challenging winter ahead. So we all are agreed, I believe, that we should note the report and agree to disseminate it and to pump the key messages out through the media, so that the population is more aware of the exceptional efforts made within this council and in the voluntary groups during the lockdown. Thank you all for your contributions.